I had been planning to confess my feelings to the girl of my dreams, but my face blindness caused me to approach the entirely wrong person. The moment I finished my speech, I was met with a sudden burst of applause from behind. My crush looked at us with pure excitement and yelled, "Aunt Olivia, someone finally wants you." I stood there, absolutely mortified and speechless. Today was my graduation day at NYU. Before the ceremony kicked off, I decided it was time for a grand gesture, a full confession to the girl I had been pining for. Regardless of the outcome, I needed to provide a sense of closure to the secret crush I had harbored for all 4 years of college. Ava Harrison was the girl of my dreams. Athletic, stunning, and full of life. Whenever I saw her on the basketball court, she radiated an infectious energy that was impossible to ignore. It all started with one accidental glance that etched her into my mind, leading me to subconsciously scan the courts for her every single day. My secret feelings had only grown more intense over the last 4 years. Graduation finally provided the perfect excuse to act. I hid behind a massive oak tree, watching my goddess sitting in the pavilion with her back to me, my heart racing so fast it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I admired her elegant silhouette and that perfect jawline I could never get tired of seeing. I was so nervous, I practically barked the bark off the tree. Taking a deep breath, I sprinted toward her just as she began to turn, keeping my head down as the words poured out of me in a frantic rush. "I'm in love with you. From the very first moment I saw you, I already started imagining our entire future together. I have so much more I want to tell you, and if you let me, I will spend the rest of my life saying it." I exhaled a long breath of relief, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. With my eyes still fixed on the ground, I noticed a pair of expensive, polished black heels and the sharp, professional lines of a tailored suit. I assumed she had dressed up because she was the chosen student speaker for the ceremony. The seconds ticked by in agonizing silence. As I waited for a response with my head still bowed, the tension became unbearable. My neck was starting to ache from the awkward position. After what felt like an eternity of silence, a sophisticated, melodic laugh echoed above me. The voice said that she was quite curious to hear those baby names I had supposedly picked out. I froze because that voice was far too mature and rich to be Ava's. I jerked my head up and locked eyes with a woman whose gaze was deep and full of amusement. In that moment, I realized I was so hopelessly lost that I didn't even deserve to be in the same zip code as sanity. Just as I turned to bolt, I heard clapping from behind me. Ava was standing there, looking thrilled as she shouted that her Aunt Olivia finally had a suitor and that she was calling her grandfather immediately. I was utterly bewildered. Ava was so ecstatic her voice actually cracked. By the time I turned around, she was already on the phone with her grandfather. She told him she had just witnessed someone confessing their undying love to Aunt Olivia and promised it was not a prank. She told her grandfather to stay calm and not to rush over, promising to send a photo of the lucky guy instead. Before I could even react, she aimed her phone at us and snapped a picture. I felt like the world was collapsing around me. She told her grandfather to remember the sports car he promised her for this news. It was a harsh lesson for me. You really have to be careful with who you crush on, because I never expected my idol to be such a chaotic mess. I was drowning in regret. I had been so nervous behind that tree that my face blindness led me to mistake a jawline, and then I went and confessed without even mentioning a name. This entire situation was a catastrophic misunderstanding of epic proportions. By the time I gathered my wits to explain, Ava had already skipped away with a joyous bounce in her step. I tried to follow her lead and escape, but the woman behind me finally spoke up. Her voice was low and carried a weight of absolute authority that stopped me in my tracks. I immediately lost my nerve. She asked if I was really leaving so soon after promising I had so much more to say. My mind raced as I scanned the campus for an excuse, and then I saw the graduation balloons floating in the sky. I told her the ceremony was starting and that I couldn't be late, suggesting we finish our conversation afterward. I was technically being honest, though I had every intention of making sure she never found me again once the ceremony was over. She simply agreed with a short response. I bolted so quickly that I missed the subtle, knowing smirk that crossed her face. I made it to the auditorium just in time to find the seat my frenemy, Sophie, had reserved for me. I was surprised to see we were in the front row, but I didn't complain since getting a good seat at an NYU commencement is a nightmare. As soon as I sat down, Sophie nudged me and asked with a wicked grin if my big confession had worked out. I managed a grimace that looked more like a cry for help than a smile, which caught Sophie off guard. At that exact moment, Ava walked in and started beaming at me as if we shared some wonderful secret. I was completely confused. Sophie noticed the interaction and smacked my leg, joking that I looked so happy my face was actually twitching, and told me to keep my weird expressions under control. I felt like the most misunderstood person on the planet. The ceremony proceeded with the usual boring speeches, and when Ava finally took the stage, the crowd went wild. I was the only one sitting in silence. The rose-tinted glasses I had worn for 4 years had finally shattered into a million pieces. I realized how shallow I had been for only focusing on her gorgeous appearance while ignoring her chaotic personality. After Ava finished her remarks, the dean took the podium. He announced that they had a very special guest, Olivia Harrison, the CEO of the Harrison Group and one of the university's most prestigious alumni. The crowd erupted in applause again, and I joined in half-heartedly, wishing for the whole thing to just be over. But then I noticed that the cheering wasn't stopping. In fact, it was getting significantly louder and more intense. Sophie suddenly grabbed my arm and started shaking me violently. She was pointing toward the stage, screaming about how incredibly stunning the guest speaker was. I looked up and felt a literal sting of embarrassment. There she was, Olivia Harrison, looking powerful and sophisticated in a designer suit. She shook the dean's hand and glided toward the microphone with an air of absolute confidence. Every gesture she made radiated authority and grace, and the spotlights seemed to follow her every move as if they were captivated by her. Amidst the thunderous applause, Olivia took her place at the podium and began to speak with effortless charisma. She concluded her speech by welcoming the new graduates into the professional world and wishing them success in their future endeavors. As the room erupted in cheers, I felt her gaze shift directly toward me. Her expression was unreadable, leaving me in a state of confused shock until the dean escorted her off the stage. All around me, people were whispering in awe, some already fantasizing about working for her or even dating her. I was completely at a loss for words. Remembering that pointed look she gave me, I realized I needed to get out of there immediately. I didn't even bother saying goodbye to Sophie, who was too busy gossiping to notice me slipping away. Back in my room, most of my belongings were already boxed up and shipped home. All I had left was a single suitcase. As I took one last look at the room that had been my home for the past 4 years, a wave of nostalgia washed over me. My moment of reflection was cut short by my phone ringing. I felt a surge of relief when I saw it was Professor Thompson, my academic advisor. I answered it right away. She asked if I was still on campus, and I told her I was just finishing up at the dorms. She instructed me to head over to her office because she had something important to discuss with me. Professor Thompson had always been a great mentor to me, so I didn't hesitate to drop what I was doing and head over. Once I got to her office, however, my brain went completely numb as I listened to her speak. She noticed I was zoning out and gave me a stern look. She emphasized that she had gone to great lengths to secure this specific opportunity and that I was the only student she was recommending for it. I desperately wanted to decline the offer right then and there. I started to protest, but she cut me off, telling me that landing a job at the Harrison Group was the ultimate goal for any graduate and that she knew how hard I had worked for this. She told me she was confident I would thrive there and encouraged me to give it my all. I was internalizing the fact that I might set a new world record for the fastest termination in corporate history, but I simply nodded and promised to try my best. I couldn't believe I had managed to confess my love to my future boss before even my first day of work. I was in a complete daze as I walked out of the office, my mind swirling with the terrifying reality of my new job placement at the Harrison Group. I was so preoccupied that I didn't notice a large group of people heading straight for me. By the time I looked up, I was already standing right in the middle of a VIP entourage led by Olivia and the university dean. It was obvious that the dean was giving Olivia the grand tour in hopes of securing a massive donation for the school. He looked annoyed and scolded me for being so careless as I almost bumped into them. I kept my head down, desperate to avoid Olivia's eyes, and apologized to the dean while trying to hurry away. But then her low, commanding voice called out my name, and the entire hallway went dead silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, even though I refused to look up. Those polished black heels stopped right in front of me, and when she spoke again, her tone was surprisingly warm and familiar. She told me she wasn't done with her tour yet, and suggested we talk once she was finished. I was certain she was referencing my earlier confession, but I couldn't prove it. I didn't stick around for the gossip. I just bolted as she watched me with a knowing smile. I didn't stop running until I was sure I had lost them. My heart was pounding against my ribs, and the memory of the dean's confused expression made me want to crawl into a hole and stay there forever. I had been a model student for 4 years, never causing any trouble. The one time I decided to do something spontaneous and confess to my crush, it turned into an absolute disaster. Olivia's intense gaze really unnerved me. I realized that her sophisticated exterior was just a mask for something much more predatory, like a wolf waiting for the right moment to strike. It was a shame someone so beautiful could be so intimidating. I felt like if I let my guard down for even a second, she would devour me whole. I shivered at the thought and hurried back to my room to grab my things and get off campus as fast as possible. As I crossed the stone bridge near the park, I noticed an elderly man with snow-white hair struggling to make it up the incline. He was looking around frantically, clearly lost and searching for someone. Having been raised by my own grandfather, I felt an immediate urge to help him. I hurried over to him and asked why he was all by himself and where his family was. His face lit up with relief the moment I spoke to him, as if he had finally found a lifeline. He explained that he was there for his granddaughter's graduation. Seeing him struggle just to walk made me feel a pang of sadness, thinking about how my own grandfather would have moved heaven and earth to be there for my big day if he were still alive. I suggested he use my phone to call his granddaughter since the campus was so sprawling. He was clearly exhausted, so I guided him to a nearby bench where he could catch his breath. He was a stubborn one, waving me off and insisting he just needed a moment to rest. He asked if he was holding me up, and I assured him that as a new graduate, I had nothing but time on my hands. There was something strangely familiar about his face, but I figured it was just one of those things. He told me I was a kind soul, and then abruptly asked if I was seeing anyone. The question caught me off guard, so I just shook my head no. To my surprise, he seemed genuinely frustrated and grumbled something under his breath about his granddaughter. I felt like I was missing something important. He then asked if I would be interested in meeting his daughter, who was also single. I was stunned and wondered if he was actually being serious. The conversation was taking a very strange turn. I tried to steer the conversation back to finding his granddaughter, but then I heard someone running toward us. A voice called out, asking him why he had wandered off without telling anyone. I recognized that voice immediately, and it sent a chill down my spine. The old man retorted with total confidence that he had sent an iMessage, and it wasn't his fault if she hadn't checked her phone. I tried to make myself as small as possible and slowly back away. But then Ava spotted me and called out, "Aunt Olivia's boyfriend?" I wanted to vanish into thin air. The moment he heard that, the old man's grumpy expression vanished, and he waved Ava over with a huge grin. Ava rushed over, teasing her grandfather about being too eager to meet his future son-in-law. I desperately wanted her to stop talking. The old man just brushed her off, telling her she didn't understand anything. I felt incredibly awkward standing there, especially since I was the same age as his granddaughter. They both just stared at me, while the grandfather confirmed that I was single and asked Ava if her aunt had actually turned me down. Ava admitted she had been too excited to get all the details. Her grandfather grumbled that if Olivia was foolish enough to let a catch like me get away, he would never hear the end of it. Ava agreed, saying her aunt was getting up there in age and should be thrilled that someone as young and handsome as me was interested. I stood there, dying inside, wishing they would realize I was standing right in front of them. When they finally finished their private conversation, the old man turned back to me with a warm smile. He reached into his pocket and pressed an ancient-looking jewelry box into my palm. He apologized for not having a better gift, explaining that his daughter was a bit of a workaholic and could be difficult, so he hoped I would be patient with her. I was completely speechless as I stared at the box. Before I could say a word, the old man stood up and started walking away with surprising speed. Ava chased after him, asking if that was her grandmother's heirloom. He confirmed it was, saying her grandmother wanted it to go to Olivia's future husband. By the time I regained my composure, they were long gone. I looked down at the box in my hand and felt a wave of anxiety. I couldn't believe he had just handed over something so valuable to a complete stranger. There was no way I could keep the gift, so I spent the next hour searching for Ava to give it back, but she was nowhere to be found. I eventually gave up and went back to the dorm where Sophie was waiting for me. Sophie was bursting with new gossip about Olivia Harrison. Apparently, she was the ultimate powerhouse, the face of success, and most importantly, she was single. Sophie said calling her impressive was the understatement of a century. I tuned out Sophie's rambling as I stared at the box hidden in my bag, which felt more like a ticking time bomb than a gift. 3 days later, I gathered my courage and headed to the Harrison Group headquarters for my first day of work. The Harrison Group headquarters was an architectural marvel, a glass skyscraper that seemed to pierce the very clouds of Manhattan. I checked in at the front desk, and a few minutes later, a professional-looking woman in her 40s arrived to escort me upstairs. She introduced herself as the HR director and told me she would be personally overseeing my orientation. I was impressed by how much weight Professor Thompson's recommendation actually carried. She went over all the standard internship protocols and the criteria I needed to meet to become a permanent employee. As we finished, she paused, looking like she wanted to say something else. I encouraged her to continue, and she just gave me a warm smile, saying she looked forward to working with me. She then told me it was time to take me to my assigned department. Since my degree was in computer science, I assumed I'd be heading to the tech labs. But when the HR director pressed the button for the top floor, my stomach dropped. Any hope I had of staying under the radar vanished when we stopped in front of the CEO's office suite. She informed me that my daily tasks would be directly managed by Olivia Harrison herself. I was utterly stunned. I asked her to clarify what my actual job title was, and when she said I was the executive assistant to the CEO, I couldn't believe my ears. I was certain there had to be some kind of clerical error. She gave me a mysterious smile and assured me that their hiring process was flawless. I was screaming internally because I was a coder, not an assistant, and I had no idea how to even begin doing that job for someone like Olivia. She told me she had to get back to work and that I should just head inside since Olivia was expecting me. She walked away before I could argue, leaving me standing outside those intimidating double doors. I stood there for a long time before finally knocking, reminding myself that I needed to return the heirloom box sitting on my nightstand. Her cool, steady voice called for me to enter. I took a deep breath, praying that a powerful CEO like her had already forgotten our awkward encounter on campus. When I walked in, she was focused on a stack of documents at her massive mahogany desk. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, surrounding her in a golden glow that made her look almost otherworldly. I felt like an idiot for ever confusing her with someone as airhead as Ava. I kept my gaze fixed on the floor, hoping to remain invisible. But then she spoke up, mocking my silence by mentioning how talkative I had been in the garden. My heart sank as I realized she hadn't forgotten a single word. I finally looked up and saw a playful glint in her eyes. Without thinking, I asked her if she had been the one behind my job offer all along. She gave me a slight smile and complimented my intuition. I immediately tried to talk my way out of the job, claiming I wasn't qualified to be her executive assistant. She countered by saying that Professor Thompson had spoken very highly of my skills. I realized then that she was far more calculating than she let on, and I tried to laugh it off as a joke. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms, giving me a look that said she was dead serious. I was so caught off guard that I didn't even notice her getting up from her desk and walking toward me. A subtle scent of mint surrounded me as she closed the distance, forcing me backward until my back hit the wall. It was my first day on the job, and my boss already had me cornered. I was so tense I could barely breathe. I stammered her name as she leaned in, her presence overwhelming. She looked me in the eye and asked if I didn't actually have feelings for her. When I couldn't find the words to respond, she told me she was giving me a chance to win her over. I was completely flabbergasted. It was the ultimate case of mistaken identity, and I had somehow ended up in a romantic standoff with my boss. Luckily, once we got to work, she was a total professional and didn't bring up the incident again. My first week at the Harrison Group flew by in a blur of activity. Since I had zero experience in administrative work, the learning curve was steep, and I inevitably started making mistakes. I hit a major snag when a presentation file for an executive meeting wouldn't open just minutes before the start time. With no other choice, I started frantically rebuilding the slides from memory. I was struggling to recall the exact financial data, and panic started to set in. Then I caught that familiar scent of mint again. I looked down and saw her shadow falling over my laptop screen. She asked me what was happening, and I felt a wave of humiliation as I explained that the file was corrupted and I was trying to recreate it. I could barely whisper my apology. After a brief silence, she told me to bring my laptop into her office. My heart was racing as I followed her through the doors, unsure of what to expect. We sat together on the sofa in her lounge area, and I watched in awe as her fingers flew across the keyboard. She was incredibly fast and efficient, fixing the presentation with practiced ease. She finished the entire deck in less than 15 minutes, and it was significantly better than the original version. The massive gap between our professional abilities was humbling, and I didn't know what to say. I apologized again, keeping my eyes fixed on my lap. The room was silent until I felt her hand gently tilt my chin up, so I was forced to look at her. She told me softly that it was all right. The warmth of her touch sent a flush across my entire face. I realized then just how close we were sitting. I could feel her breath against my skin, and the air between us felt electric. My mind went completely blank as I got lost in the depth of her gaze. There was an intensity in her eyes that was absolutely captivating, and for a moment, I forgot where I was. The tension in the room was palpable. She told me that if I ever struggled again, I should come to her directly instead of stressing out alone, reminding me that she was there to help. She waited for me to acknowledge her, and as I tilted my head, we were inches apart. I was sure she could hear my heart thumping against my chest. Just as she started to lean in closer, the office door flew open with a loud bang. Ava burst into the room and immediately started screaming at the top of her lungs. I was mortified. Olivia looked absolutely furious at the interruption, while I scrambled to the other side of the room, trying to look as professional and distant as possible. Ava was already on her phone, gleefully telling her grandfather that she had caught us in a romantic embrace. She was laughing about how she was finally going to have a new cousin to play with. I finally saw Ava for who she really was, a total agent of chaos. Any lingering admiration I had for her had completely disintegrated into dust. Olivia's voice was icy as she reprimanded Ava for not knocking. I saw Ava actually flinch at the tone. Ava explained that their grandfather was being difficult at the care facility and refusing his treatments. It suddenly clicked for me that the old man I met on campus must have snuck out of his nursing home. Thinking about the heirloom box and the man's kindness, I asked if he was doing okay. Ava's face lit up, and she suggested that if I went to visit him, he would probably be much more cooperative with his doctors. I was pretty sure Ava's enthusiasm was entirely motivated by her desire for that new sports car. Olivia then announced that she would be bringing me to visit him that evening. I realized then that Ava was a total prankster. At this point, I didn't even want to admit that I had ever had a crush on her. The meeting was a success, and afterward, the HR director gave me a literal thumbs up for a job well done. I felt like a complete fraud. As the workday ended, I got an iMessage from Olivia that simply said, "Wait for me." I figured it was the least I could do after she helped me with the presentation. There was a large group of people waiting for us at the entrance of the care facility. The second I stepped out of the car, I became the center of attention. I finally understood why Olivia had been so quiet and tense during the drive over. Grandpa Arthur was in the middle of the crowd, bragging to everyone that I was his new son-in-law. I was too embarrassed to move until Olivia walked over and firmly took my hand, leading me inside. She addressed him as Dad, which made the whole family dynamic even more confusing for me. Given his age, calling him sir felt too formal, but anything else felt like I was being overfamiliar. He must have sensed my hesitation because he told me to call him whatever I liked, joking that I could save the formal titles for after the wedding. Everyone around us burst into laughter. I tried to hide behind Olivia, so I missed the subtle smile that touched her lips. I was surprised by how luxurious the facility was, and we were even picked up by a private shuttle to take us to his villa. Ava was in the living room playing video games when we arrived. She immediately jumped up and greeted us as Aunt Olivia and Uncle Lucas. I decided it was best to just ignore her antics. Grandpa Arthur wouldn't let go of my hand and insisted that I sit right next to him. As we were talking, a housekeeper came in to ask him about his dinner preferences. He told her to ignore him and just focus on making a great meal for me. The housekeeper looked concerned and told him he needed to start eating real food again. Olivia looked worried and asked what was wrong. The housekeeper explained that he had lost his appetite and was currently relying on 4 supplements. Grandpa Arthur snapped at her to be quiet. My heart sank as he reminded me so much of my own grandfather during his final months. I remembered how my grandfather would lose his appetite when he was sick and how I used to make him a simple bowl of homemade flour drop soup to help him eat. Without thinking, I offered to make some for Arthur. I went into the kitchen and started gathering some basic ingredients. I was just whisking some eggs into the flour when Olivia walked in and leaned against the counter, watching me with a relaxed expression. I told her to stop staring, and she just smiled, telling me that her father had really taken a liking to me. I wasn't sure what to make of that. She told me that the last meal her mother ever cooked for her father was that exact same soup. It was the only thing her mother knew how to cook, and her father had always loved it. Ever since she passed away, he hadn't allowed anyone to make it for him. When I finally served the soup, I noticed Arthur's eyes were glistening with tears. He finished every last drop. Afterward, he insisted on taking me for a private walk in the garden, making sure Olivia and Ava stay behind. He shared a lot of stories about Olivia's childhood. He confessed he had been worried she would never find someone to share her life with, and expressed how glad he was that I came along. I tried to correct his misunderstanding, but he didn't give me the chance. He told me that finding someone you truly care for is rare and urged me not to let fear get in the way of my happiness. I felt a knot in my stomach as we left, seeing him waving from the porch until we were out of sight. The months seemed to fly by, and I finally received the official email from HR confirming my permanent position. I was officially a full-time employee of the Harrison Group. I had planned to celebrate with Sophie, but Olivia sent me an iMessage at the last minute asking me to accompany her to a high-profile birthday gala. She took me to an upscale styling studio to get fitted for a tuxedo before the event. Once we were in the car, she suddenly muttered that she didn't want to go anymore, which completely confused me. People can be so unpredictable. The gala was held at the Plaza Hotel, and the sheer number of luxury cars outside was a clear indicator of the host's social standing. The moment Olivia stepped inside, she was swarmed by people wanting to greet her. I told her I would wait by the buffet so she could focus on her business. She looked at me with a soft expression and reached out to brush a stray hair from my forehead. I heard several people nearby gasp at the intimate gesture before she told me to stay close and promised to find me as soon as she was done. I felt a flutter in my chest, thinking about how stunning she looked tonight. I headed toward the dessert table, my heart still racing, but I quickly realized that these elite events were breeding grounds for gossip. I overheard some women whispering about me, wondering who I was since they had never seen me before. One of them snidely suggested I was just some low-level actor trying to climb the social ladder by clinging to Olivia. I was about to defend myself when Ava suddenly appeared out of nowhere. She demanded to know who they thought they were and told them they had no right to insult her future uncle. I couldn't believe she was actually standing up for me. Ava called them all a bunch of gossiping hags and said it was no wonder Olivia wasn't interested in any of them. That set them off even more. I finally decided I had heard enough and stepped forward to confront the woman leading the insults. I told her to watch her mouth and that my relationship with Olivia was none of her business, pointing out how classless she was being despite her wealthy background. She looked like she was about to slap me in her rage. Just as she swung her hand, Olivia stepped in front of me, catching her wrist mid-air. She coldly asked them when they thought they had the right to speak about her fiancé, leaving everyone in the room stunned into silence. She turned to me and chided me for just standing there, saying she would have been devastated if I had gotten hurt. The look in everyone's eyes shifted from contempt to utter shock. Grandpa Arthur suddenly appeared and announced to the crowd that he was more than happy with the match, even joking that I was the one hesitating because I thought Olivia was too old for me. He walked right up to us with a mischievous grin. Olivia drove me home after the gala, and the silence in the car was thick with unspoken tension. As we pulled into my apartment complex, I felt a sense of relief, but then she leaned in and told me I looked incredibly handsome tonight. She explained that her words at the party weren't just for show or to protect me, and she hoped I was smart enough to realize that her feelings were genuine. I was too stunned to respond. The reality of our social differences weighed heavily on me. I realized I wanted something permanent with her, not just a fleeting romance, but the fear of it not working out was overwhelming. I finally gathered the strength to tell her that I didn't think we were a good match. Instead of being upset, she just chuckled and teased me for giving up so easily, reminding me of how passionate my initial confession had been. I tried to explain what had really happened that day, but she cut me off. She challenged me to give her one good reason why we wouldn't work, insisting that our age difference was no obstacle to our happiness. I couldn't find the words, so I just bolted from the car and ran into my building. I got a call from Professor Thompson during my lunch break about NYU's upcoming 70th anniversary. I knew this was my chance to finally ask her about a secret I had been curious about for years. I finally asked her who my anonymous college benefactor had been. After some hesitation, she revealed that it had been Olivia all along, and that she had requested to keep it a secret to avoid making me feel indebted to her. I rushed out of the office and tried to call Olivia, but she didn't pick up. A feeling of dread started to wash over me as the call went to voicemail. I made my way to the campus auditorium and was stunned to see Olivia standing on stage. There was a massive photo of me projected on the screen behind her. She announced to the entire room that the boy in the photo was her partner. She shared that she had first seen me in the university library years ago and had been captivated by me ever since. She addressed me directly, promising to spend her entire life proving that our differences didn't matter. I looked up at her, tears in my eyes, and shouted that I was all in. Lucas never realized that I saw him twice that day at the library. The first time, he was so engrossed in his book that he didn't notice me taking the photo that I still keep on my desk. He still has no idea that I was the one who quietly arranged all of his internship opportunities. I spent years waiting for the perfect moment to introduce myself without overwhelming him. It took 4 long years for that moment to arrive. On his graduation day, I waited in the pavilion, hoping he would find his way to me. Just as I planned, he walked right into my life. Ava was so frustrated her knuckles turned white, but she was stuck in a verbal battle with a group of women she couldn't just fight. She finally slammed her champagne flute onto the dessert table in a fit of rage. She called them a bunch of miserable gossips and shouted that it was no wonder her Aunt Olivia wanted nothing to do with any of them. Ava's outburst backfired and immediately drew the ire of every socialite within earshot, including those who had previously just been bystanders. They began mocking us both, suggesting that Ava and I must have a scandalous secret relationship since she was defending me so fiercely. One woman sneered that young people these days certainly knew how to keep things interesting behind closed doors. I had reached my limit and stepped forward to confront the woman leading the charge. It was obvious her hostility stemmed from a desperate crush on Olivia and a deep-seated jealousy of my position. I told her to watch her tone and reminded her that a woman of her supposed status should be embarrassed to speak with such lack of class. She was stunned into silence for a moment before her entitlement took over and she swung her hand to slap me. Before she could make contact, a tall figure stepped between us and a sharp scent of mint filled the air. The woman was pushed back several steps by the sheer force of Olivia's sudden intervention. Olivia's voice rang out with chilling authority as she asked the crowd who gave them the right to disrespect her fiancé. A collective gasp rippled through the room while Avis stood to the side, giving me a frantic and excited thumbs up. I was still reeling from the shock of being called her fiancé when Olivia reached down and firmly interlaced her fingers with mine. She looked at me with a soft expression and chided me for not defending myself, saying she would be heartbroken if I had actually been hurt. The stares from the guests shifted from mockery to absolute disbelief as the power dynamic in the room flipped. A few people tried to step in and diffuse the tension, but Olivia ignored them with a cold glare and began leading me toward the exit. The woman refused to back down and screamed that her father, the patriarch of the Miller family, would never let a commoner like me join the Harrison ranks. She tried to use a major real estate deal as leverage, reminding Olivia how much her company needed their family's land in Manhattan. I couldn't believe she was arrogant enough to bring business into a personal dispute in such a public way. I felt a wave of anxiety at her threat, but before I could worry, a booming and cheerful voice cut through the air. It was Grandpa Arthur, who announced to everyone that he was practically begging me to marry his daughter and that the only holdout was me because I thought Olivia was too old. The room immediately shifted focus as guests scrambled to pay their respects to Arthur Harrison, a legend in the New York business world. He ignored them all and walked straight up to us, sternly telling Olivia that she was failing as a partner by allowing people to disrespect me in her presence. He joked that if she couldn't even manage a simple land deal, she didn't deserve to be with someone as wonderful as me. The crowd was absolutely silent, reeling from the realization of how highly the Harrison patriarch valued me. My eyes welled up with tears as I tucked my arm into his, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for the way this powerful family was protecting me. The social tide turned instantly, and the people who had been mocking me moments ago were now looking at the Miller woman with disdain. I didn't stick around to watch her downfall and followed Arthur and Olivia out of the hotel. The drive back to my apartment was filled with a heavy, uncomfortable silence that made my skin crawl. I couldn't stop thinking about Olivia calling me her fiancé and nervously twisted my fingers together. She seemed perfectly calm as she navigated the New York traffic, which only made me more anxious. When we finally pulled into my complex, I reached for my seatbelt, but her voice stopped me before I could escape. She leaned across the center console and looked me directly in the eyes, whispering that I looked incredible this evening. The memory of her earlier hesitation about going to the party came rushing back, and I felt a massive flush creep up my neck. I stammered a quick thank you and tried to open the door as fast as I could. She caught my wrist before I could get out, her touch firm but gentle. She told me that her declaration at the gala wasn't just a tactic to save my reputation. She looked at me with an intensity that made it clear she wanted me to understand just how much she truly cared. I sat there in silence, my mind racing with everything the woman at the party had said about our different social classes. The distance between Olivia and me felt like an unbridgeable chasm, far wider than anything I'd felt for Ava. My crush on Ava had been a simple college infatuation, but what I felt for Olivia was something much more terrifying and real. With Olivia, the stakes were much higher because I didn't want a temporary fling. I wanted a future. But the thought of trying to fit into her world for the rest of my life felt impossible. After a long period of internal struggle, I forced myself to tell her that we simply weren't a good match. It hurt to say the words, but I knew I had to be honest with her. Olivia didn't seem upset by my rejection. Instead, she just laughed and playfully messed up my hair. She teased me for giving up so easily, reminding me of the confidence I had shown during my accidental confession on campus. I tried to finally explain the mistake I made that day, but she cut me off. She demanded a real reason to walk away, warning me not to use our wealth or our age as an excuse. She insisted that despite being older, She was more than capable of making me happy if I just gave her a chance. I couldn't handle the conversation anymore and practically fell out of the car to get away. Over the next few weeks, things at the office went back to a strictly professional level. Olivia was constantly traveling for business, which gave me the space I thought I needed. I threw myself into my work, determined to prove that I deserved my position at the firm through merit alone. Even though we didn't see much of each other, she never missed a day sending me a thoughtful iMessage to check in on me. Her constant messages felt like a countdown, reminding me that she was still waiting for my answer. During lunch one day, Professor Thompson called to catch up and reminded me that NYU was celebrating its 70th anniversary that weekend. I knew I had to attend the event, especially since there was a lingering question I needed to ask my mentor. I had intended to bring it up on graduation day, but my disastrous confession had completely wiped it from my mind. Sophie was already there when I arrived on campus, and she immediately started pestering me for details about my relationship with Olivia. She joked that she needed the romantic gossip to fuel her daydreams. I just brushed her off with a laugh and headed to the faculty offices. I sat down with Professor Thompson and finally asked her the identity of the anonymous donor who had paid my tuition. I explained that I was finally in a position to start paying them back and wanted to thank them for their incredible generosity. My grandfather had struggled to raise me after my parents passed away, and I knew how much he had sacrificed. When I was a freshman, the school had suddenly found a benefactor to cover all my costs. I had spent years wondering who they were and hoping for a chance to express my gratitude. Professor Thompson was hesitant to reveal the truth even now, clearly bound by a promise of confidentiality. It took a lot of pleading and a few emotional appeals before she finally relented and told me that the donor was someone I already knew well. She revealed that Olivia had been my secret benefactor from the very beginning and had insisted on remaining anonymous to avoid making me feel indebted. She also admitted that the job offer at the Harrison Group had been Olivia's idea all along. The revelation left me completely speechless as I realized that everything I thought was a coincidence was actually her quiet care. I remembered the warmth in her eyes that day in the park and realized she had been watching over me for years. I tried to call her immediately to talk, but she didn't pick up after several attempts. My phone finally rang, and I answered it without checking the caller ID, assuming it was her. It was actually Sophie, who sounded panicked and told me I needed to get to the main auditorium as fast as possible. I sprinted into the auditorium and froze in my tracks. Olivia was standing center stage, looking radiant, while a massive candid photo of me reading in the library was projected on the screen behind her. I had no idea when or how she had even taken it. She spoke into the microphone, telling the entire student body that the boy in the photo was her partner and the love of her life. She explained to the quieted room that she had captured that image of me years ago during a visit to the campus library. She described how she had seen me sitting in a quiet corner, completely absorbed in my studies, and how that one moment had stayed with her ever since. She admitted to the crowd that she had been hopelessly captivated by me from that very second. Olivia gave the audience a dazzling smile and confirmed that it truly was a case of love at first sight. She explained that she had been careful to move slowly because she didn't want to overwhelm or frighten my feelings. She looked directly at me in the crowd and promised that our differences in status were irrelevant and that she would spend the rest of her life free. Suddenly, a spotlight found me in the darkened room, and the entire audience began chanting for us to be together amidst thunderous applause. I locked eyes with her from across the vast hall, and despite the noise, I knew she could read the answer on my lips. I shouted back with everything I had that I was ready to be with her forever. Olivia's POV. I sent Lucas an iMessage asking for my favorite tomato dumpling soup for dinner. He replied a few minutes later, asking if I was ever going to get tired of eating the same thing every single day. I had been eating that soup for a week straight and was definitely craving something else, but he was still too shy to take it. I texted him back that anything he made was perfect for me, which is expected, caused him to stop replying out of sheer embarrassment. Lucas never knew that I had actually encountered him twice during my visit to the library. The first time was in the library, where I was so struck by him that I had to take a photo. The second was later that afternoon at the dining. He was eating a meager meal of just a roll and some potatoes, looking so content and serene that it broke my heart. I insisted that the university administrators serve me the exact same meal in the executive lounge. After one bite, I knew I could never let that boy out of my life. It took 4 years of careful planning and supporting him from the shadows before I finally got my chance. On the day he graduated, I waited for him to find me, and he walked right into my trap, just as I had hoped. Now, my phone buzzed with an iMessage from him asking if I wanted to go grocery shopping since we were out of food. As I watched him carefully compare prices in the produce aisle, I felt a wave of domestic bliss that I never thought possible. I couldn't help myself and walked up behind him, wrapping my arms around his waist as he picked out vegetables. He jumped a little and whispered for me to leave in public, but I just held him tighter. I loved the way he said my name. His voice was so soft and sweet that it felt like a gentle caress against my soul. I leaned down and gave him a quick kiss, which sent him scurrying away with a bright red face to finish the shopping. Once we got home, I followed him to the kitchen and insisted on helping him prep the meal, enjoying every second of the shared time. He teased me for taking so long with the tomatoes, which only made me smile at his playfulness. I slowly turned off the water and stepped up behind him, reaching around his waist to set the fresh tomato on the cutting board. I caught his hand just as he reached for the fruit, feeling a slight tremor in his breath as I pulled him close. I whispered into his ear, watching the color rise in his cheeks, and leaned in to press a soft kiss. We never did get around to eating that soup that night, but I found something far more satisfying to occupy our time. The next morning, I watched him sleep peacefully beside me and felt a deep sense of contentment, knowing that our age was never going to be an issue for our happiness. This story is not about mistaken identity. It is about the quiet love that watches from the shadows, waiting for the right one. Lucas thought he was confessing to his college crush, but his words reached someone else, a woman who had been loving him for distant years. She funded his education, arranged his job, and stood in his blind spot, never asking for credit. True love does not always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives through shared grocery runs, homemade soup, and a patient heart that has been practicing the art of loving you long before you know yourself. The brightest star is not the one you chase. It is the one that has been following you home all along.